Sharing our lives with other people is hard, but living alone, totally alone, is really not even possible, let alone good, right? When Jesus calls his first disciples, he calls them to, or invites them to follow him, share their lives with one another, right, and receive this free gift of salvation and redemption from their very selves, right? As the church grew in the early church, they expanded quickly and left the strict Jewish foundations that it started with and quickly incorporated Gentiles and other different kinds of cultures, right? They didn't get along very well. It was very messy, trying to come into agreement with one another, and they quickly devolved into various factions of the churches throughout the Mediterranean world. And kind of at the root of that was various leaders and various groups trying to make the church and look and think and do and live like they thought things should be, right? And so that put them in opposition with one another. I think our human nature is very similar to this, right? I think we are by nature most comfortable when we are free to do and think and live and behave as we want to, right? Without the external pressures of a parent or a boss or a spouse or friends or colleagues or whatever, other sorts of responsibilities that get put onto us, right? But since we were born to our parents and live our lives with our friends and families and go to work and have colleagues and supervisors, we tend to gravitate towards those other groups of people that also think and live and do and think like us, right? And so a natural consequence of all of that is that we ignore or hide or suppress or silence other voices, other groups, other people that think and live and do and behave differently from us, right? Maybe even challenge some of the things that we do and say and think. I think one of the greatest challenges that's still facing the church today is precisely this problem, right? I would venture to guess most of us go to churches that look and think and act and talk like we do, right? They make us, we sort of feel comfortable. They fit with our style of how we think churches are supposed to go. And so we tend to ignore or silence or remove the other churches or even around us, even churches that might be physically closer to us, because they don't think and look and act and talk like we do, or they maybe challenge some of the things that we think are the most important parts of being a Christian or going to church or whatever. One of those greatest things going on here in the churches in America, I think, is along racial lines, right? The Sunday hour is one of the most segregated hours in all of American life, as James Baldwin famously said. And so during the civil rights era, Martin Luther King Jr. was in Birmingham, working for the cause of social and justice and racial reconciliation, and was put in prison, arrested, put in prison in Birmingham. And from prison, he writes a letter to the Christian leaders in Birmingham, primarily the white Christian leaders. And it's a famous letter from Birmingham jail. And he lays out a case of the cause for racial inequalities, the evil of racism, and the sort of call to action that kind of lays out his nonviolent approach to what he's trying to work for and struggle with. But what struck me most as I was reading through this is that he calls out primarily the moderate white Christian leaders. He doesn't call out specifically and is not addressed to the overt racists like the Ku Klux Klan or the really oppressive policies, right? He's really calling out these moderate Christians that he would say agree with the cause for racial reconciliation and racial justice, but are doing nothing about it, right? It says that those folks are the greatest barrier for the cause for social justice and for racial reconciliation of his day in the 60s. And It's interesting because as I was kind of reading through that, he says some of the same things, right? That these white churches, comfortable in their own way of doing things, right, are able then to ignore and not hear the cries of injustice and the pain of racism that's going around, right? It's obviously out there. It's very clear to see from Martin Luther King Jr.'s perspective if you would simply just open your eyes and see the challenges that are being faced by the African American communities, right, in America. But these white churches simply wouldn't do anything about it. So the call from Martin Luther King Jr. in this letter to Birmingham jail was to sort of open our eyes and expand who we are paying attention to. And so that's my challenge for us this week as we're reading through section 4, is that we pay attention to who are the voices that we are ignoring, who are the voices that we're not hearing, and ask ourselves, why is it that we are resistant to hear these voices, and what is it that they could be saying to us about our need to check some of our patterns of behavior and speech and act, and the way that we sort of think about the church that needs to change.